Intro, intro, intro.
What the hell?
Sorry. This is Europe in 1805. A lot of big wars have happened, and more are to come. The one right now is started by a guy, which was definitely average height for the time. I'm of course talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. This guy, which did a lot of things, which I do not have time to explain in this documentary, because we are talking about a different country named Sweden. That one is Sweden. They weren't really the strongest they had ever been. They were pretty poor, the military was pretty weak, they weren't respected and feared like they were 100 years ago. They had a small population and food shortages. But luckily they had a king who was smart, brave and really skilled on the battlefield. Oh wait.
Boring!
Wait. He wasn't smart or anything. His idol was smart and all that, but this king sucked. We'll get more into that later, but we can mention now his idol. It is the myth, the man, the legend, Charles XII! Woo! The king of Sweden, Gustav IV Adolf, really hated Napoleon, so he joined the Third Coalition. It didn't help that he had unreal views about the Swedish military and its power, and he often acted on what he wanted and not how it was gonna go through and if it was even realistic. Like I said, he sucked. The Swedes thought mostly in Swedish Pomerania, here, but then the coalition was defeated and in 1807 Napoleon had puppeted or forced the majority of Europe to join him. The Emperor of Russia, Alexander I, met with Napoleon and they made an alliance against Great Britain, which were the only major power that still fights Napoleon. Then stuff happens and Sweden gets two choices. Either join France or stay with Great Britain, which was the ruler of the sea. Let's see what Gustav chooses. So as you can see, Gustav, we are badly surrounded with enemies and we know you don't like Napoleon, but this isn't a good time to fight him since our only ally can't help us because the sea is frozen and Russia is preparing for war against us. Maybe we should join Napoleon for the time being and wait for an opportunity to betray him instead. Is that good with you? We shall not. We are prepared for any invasion, and even if we get attacked, we'll be fine. No big deal. I'm the greatest military commander of all time. Get it? Well, I guess you're right. You're the king, so fine. Sir, it seems like we're getting invaded by the Russians and losing badly. What are we gonna do? Everybody makes mistakes, right?
Screw you guys. I'm going home. But Carmen, we're trying to... screw you guys. Home.
Yeah, Sweden got pretty wrecked. At the beginning, at least. But they had still prepared some plans and stuff for likely invasions from the Russians. But the best thing is that they had a huge fort called Sveaborg outside Helsingfors, which is there. It was well garrisoned, well equipped and well storaged with lots of food and ammunition. It had a total of 734 cannons and 6,750 troops stationed there. They also had a general who won a fairly big victory against the Russians about 18 years earlier. His name was Karl Olof Krönstedt. At least we have something so good that even the king can't screw it up. Like, they can take half of the entire kingdom of Sweden before Sveaborg falls. Like, there's no way that somebody can screw up that bad that we lose Sveaborg. So that I surrendered. I said I surrendered. Alright, what the actual...
A few moments later.
Okay, so the enemy had 6,500 men, right? Right. And you had 6,750 men, and you were defending, which is much, much, much easier, right? Right. So the enemy was besieging somebody with more troops than they had, right? Right. And you had 734 cannons compared to the enemy's 50, right? Right?
And you barely fought,
Right?
so why did you surrender?
Reasons. Okay, now the real stuff happens. So the Russians attacking without warning and taking more and more of Finland, the loss of Sveaborg, the king not wanting to send more troops to aid the war, partially because the threat of Denmark with Napoleon would invade, because they were also at war with Sweden, the fact that Russia had many, many, many more troops than Sweden, and that the troops were close to starving and were always on retreat, make it look like the war was basically over. But as I said, the army was always on retreat, so the Russians had only taken land and they hadn't defeated the Swedish army yet. So when the Swedes turned around and fought back for once, and on the 2nd of May, a new phase of the war began. The summer offensive. The Russians had already taken most of Finland before finally the summer offensive began. But now the Swedes alongside Finns showed Russia that on the battlefield the Swedes were still successful. Now as the Swedes are liberating more of Finland, we can look into some of the bigger battles of the summer offensive. Let's start with the Battle of Lappo. The Swedish had more troops than the Russians, whom had taken defensive positions in the city. The plan for the Swedish was simple. They were to surround the Russians and destroy the Russians. Though the battle became quite chaotic, but in the midst of the chaotic battle, the Björneborg regimentet showed bravery as they marched up the open hills and attacked the Russians in the city. But in the end of the battle, the Swedish had cleansed the city of Russians with the help of the Björneborg regimentet. Sadly, I couldn't find any information about casualties. Now to some action!
Oh my god, hey, what you doing? Oh, I'm fine, no.
The next battle is the Battle of Kajajoki, or something like that, with George Karl von Döplen as the Swedish general, and for the Russians they have Dmitrevsk Sepelev. Yeah. The Russians had been really cruel against the civilians and the farmers around Kajajoki. And after some fighting, another victory was for Sweden. With these continuous victories, Sweden was pushing back into Finland and taking it back. And things were looking actually pretty good. Now, before we continue, let's roll back time a little and see what the king has been doing. I look so good. Yeah. Your Majesty, really good news. The ice has melted and the British have sent us 14,000 men to help us. And our entire army in the war is only 21,000 men. And nope. What did you say? We are obviously winning this war, and with me as such a good king, we can surely withstand a long war. Let's just get back to the war. Now let's... Oh, Sweden is losing. Yep, that's right. Even though Sweden was winning militarily, they were still starving, and especially the troops. And they were filled with disease also. So now Sweden was back on square one again. And this time they weren't gonna get any further. And now, with everything so bad, the army was starting to fail too. And the Russians kept advancing until they got to Västerbotten, where finally some reinforcements came and they could stop the Russians. And in Stockholm, this happened. This is all the king's fault. If we hadn't had him, then we would surely have had a bigger chance to win. Wait, why do we have him? Wait a minute. You're talking about me? Wait a minute. In a coup, the king was sent off to Schweiz, and the new government signed peace with the Russians, losing the entirety of Finland and Åland. The Swedish kingdom was almost cut in half. Sweden would though get Norway in a kind of union, but the empire days for Sweden was over. But a new power for Sweden would come in economy!